Great, let me introduce myself then. I'm Kirsty Murphy. I'm the Accelerator Program Manager on our Maritime Accelerator here at the Catapult, which is part of our Maritime Flagship Program. I'm going to introduce, so we've got here 5 of our SMEs who are on the current cohort for our program. But before I go into your interesting stories, I just want to tell you a little bit more about the Accelerator Program. So these guys have joined the program at the end of last summer. It's quite a highly competitive program. It's got a really good reputation. So did really well to get through onto it, and really high quality of applications. As part of the program, they're given a bespoke program of business support, and also there's a pot of money for some trials. So they also compete again and have to put in proposals to try and get a trial, which all 5 here have been able to do this year. So we'll hear more about that shortly. The challenges this year, so we do change the challenges every year. This year, we focused on power propulsion and vessel ops, shoreside technology and infrastructure, safety and security, and resource management. And we deliver the program alongside our partners from WeSprint and GR Consulting, who I think I've seen in the room as well. And I also want to thank our partners, a big thank you, to our partners, because without our partners, we would not be able to do the trials. So big shout out to Serco, Port of Tyne, Maersk, University of Plymouth, Royal Navy Enterprise, Portsmouth International Port, and DP World. And we'll talk more about the interactions with the partners. So first of all, let's start on the far left, Richard, with you. If you could, everyone just say your company, maybe a little bit about yourselves, and a brief intro to your trial as well, I think would be useful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Richard Osborne. I'm CTO of Purple Transform. Purple Transform are a smart analytics company. So what we do is we aggregate IoT data, CCTV data using machine vision, and data from any other system with an API, bring it all together, and then we can run workflow on it, transpose it, and alert people to real-time events. So our involvement in the Maritime Accelerator is primarily around safety and security around the physical environment, so things like PPE compliance, and identifying people in hazardous areas and so forth. And we're working with DP World and Serco.
Lovely, thank you. Mike.
Fantastic. Mike Tinmouth, co-founder, chief operating officer at ACUA Ocean. We've built now, I was going to say, designing and developing. We've built, and she's in the water, a USV Pioneer, so a hydrogen electric uncrewed surface vessel. So a fairly large drone that's designed for ocean monitoring, data collection, defense security, logistics, and offshore work as well. So for our demonstration, we are looking at hydrogen in a small port environment. So we've also developed our own hydrogen refueling station, which enables us to fuel the vessel and go out to sea. And we're working with a range of the partners, including Serco, but also the Royal Navy, University of Plymouth, and others as well. Holder have been very directly involved in our project, really looking at the optimization of the hydrogen systems and what that could mean if we scale it out as well.
Thank you. Mike.
Mike Newsam, founder and CEO of Stellar Advanced Concepts. We focus exclusively on high-impact dual-use technologies, and specifically focusing on nature-inspired engineering. And all of our technology lines all essentially add some type of efficiency or performance gain for crewed or uncrewed vessels and autonomous platforms. So we work across sector, but as it happens, all of our core technologies are very applicable to the maritime sector.
Thank you. Kailash.
Kailash, CEO and founder of SpatialCortex technology. We develop sensors and analytics to help workplaces understand and reduce the risks of workplace injuries, particularly musculoskeletal disorders like back injuries that can happen because of manual or physical handling, and also from desk-based activities. Through the program, we have had the opportunity to work with both Serco and Port of Tyne to trial 2 of our product variants for desk-based ergonomics and also for manual handling, full body ergonomics.
Thank you. Jehan.
I am founder and CEO of Rux Energy, Dr. Jehan Kanga. We do advanced nanoporous materials to improve the volumetric efficiency and the total energy efficiency of hydrogen storage. Our technologies are a key enablement technology to really lower the cost of hydrogen for end users. We've been working very closely with Serco to look at the end-to-end efficiencies and the total cost and reliability of hydrogen as a potential replacement fuel to build greater fuel security in a world that's becoming more and more uncertain. So the results of that pilot, we'll talk a little bit
Absolutely,
today. But
sure.
Yeah, thanks.
And so this is year 3 of the programme, and actually I think it's quite interesting this year, apart from yourself, Mike, with ACUA, actually all the businesses really are sort of cross-sector. They're not really specific to maritime, but we've been looking at maritime use cases, but we'll come back to that because I think it's quite important. So we'll start off the panel then talking a little bit specifically about the maritime sector before we broaden it out. And we'll start off with the sort of most obvious question, I guess, which is what do you see as the most pressing challenges facing UK maritime and ports? And also, what are you doing to address them? So I am going to come to you, Jehan, because it's you segued me nicely into that.
Yeah, I think, it sort of depends on the specific stakeholders, but I think the maritime's really at the pointy end of the hard-to-abate decarbonisation challenge because the EU has stipulated some pretty severe regulations that the big shipping companies have to meet, but also the ports have to enable that because that involves the introduction of new e-fuels. And look, diesel is a really good fuel. And all of the e-fuels have different challenges. Ammonia is terrifyingly toxic. E-methanol's unbelievably expensive, and hydrogen's really difficult to store. So, they've all got their challenges, and these shipping companies have to sort of, they've got to place bets right now because the potential cost to them in terms of the tax from these regulatory changes are really, really severe. So that actually feeds all the way down through the whole supply chain, all the way to the operators, including all the workboat operators, of which Circa is a good example of one of the largest workboat operators in the UK with 93 workboats. And so, everyone is now thinking about how do we, take on this challenge, but it's not easy. One of the big challenges is that the ports and the shipping infrastructure, it's been around for 60, 80, 100 years, and we now have to flip the whole thing. And there's not a lot of land, and doing on-water activities is really challenging from a regulatory point of view perspective with the MCA. So, taking this whole thing into account, we have to work as build these big collaborations because there's so many different. So that's the challenge: is to bring everyone into the tent and to take one big step forward, and then another big step forward. Because we've got to do this together, and there's so many little changes that have to happen all at once to actually make it work.
Yeah, I think our collaboration is a theme that we'll come back to. I'm going to move on to ACUA, following on the hydrogen sort of theme. So how does what Jehan just talked about there, how does that affect you in the sort of small vessel sector?
Yeah, massively so. So infrastructure is a huge challenge. As a vessel operator, without that reliable, the supply chain in terms of the molecule, but also then actually how do you store it in a port and harbour environment is a massive challenge at the moment, and the reliability of what is a new and emerging market. The other element that Jehan touched on was the regulatory side. So we have worked from day one very closely with both Lloyd's Register as class and also the MCA, but they're learning at the same time as us. So you go to work to a rule and there aren't any rules. So you've got to work through that. So one of the great opportunities, and part of the reason we're based in Plymouth, is a very, very forward-leaning port authority that have actually got an autonomous test bed so we can go out and experiment. But that's only sort of enabled by having that forward-leaning basis. Otherwise, the real challenges are how do you comply to regulations that don't exist yet? And as a regulator, how do you set rules when actually you're not sure where the rest of the world is going? You don't want to be too sort of punitive to UK companies. So it's been a bit of a moving target.
Yeah, and it's certainly been a challenge for you in this programme as well.
Has indeed.
You've got the wounds to prove it. Let me move on to you, Stella, then. So we've talked about sort of the future fuels, but you're looking at the other aspect, which is more about driving efficiency, so we use less of the fuel in the first place. So, what's your programme doing to address that, or your solution for this programme?
Yeah, so under the Accelerator, we trialled a novel nature-inspired texture, which is a drag reduction surface. And drag reduction is an important component of decarbonisation of shipping operations. So one thing that we're all aware of here as being SMEs, we really need a shorter-term route to market that is often typical of large established sectors like the maritime sector. So although we're developing this drag reduction surface for the full-size maritime vessels, under the Accelerator, we pivoted towards uncrewed underwater vehicles. We looked at making this system as a retrofit, so always getting most of the way towards a retrofit product. And uncrewed underwater vehicles and autonomous systems are also a growing component of the maritime sector, not only for actually achieving data surveys and the like, but also they're very important for keeping crew out of dangerous and hazardous environments.
Brilliant, thank you. So then we're going to look at what I consider more of the health and safety or safety and security solutions on the programme. So, Richard, how important is digitisation for the maritime sector?
Well, it's a very physical environment. And when we've talked about digitisation generally, we've talked about, IT systems and knowledge workers and the back office environment. But all of these very operational and physical environments where there's heavy machinery and there's interaction of that with people, that's where the real opportunity going forward for digitisation is. So using sensors and using cameras to properly build up a picture of what's happening in that physical environment and using that to improve safety.
Brilliant, thank you. And then on to you, Kailash. So what's your perspective on this? Obviously, the sector you talked about has a really strong health and safety sort of focus. So how can you help solve that?
Sure. So we look at it from a staff safety and injury prevention perspective. And I believe there are 3 challenges that the sector is facing at the moment. Firstly, I think the rate of MSD injuries in the sector is quite high. And if you look at statistics from the Health and Safety Executive, the MSD injury rate of the sector is close to double compared to the national average. That's the first thing. And the second thing is thinking about why it's happening. Is what we find is that legacy systems have limitations, which means that the risks are not identified. And what we are able to show with some of the trials that we have conducted during the program is that with data and insights, we are able to fill the gaps, and which is then leading to positive outcomes. I think there is a massive potential for that, like what Purple Transform touched on. And thirdly, the important challenge is that the sector as a whole has an aging workforce. And with the trials that we have done, we find that the average workforce age in a port can be 45 or more. And the sector is also struggling to kind of attract and bring in new, younger talent. So it kind of puts the emphasis back on the sector to actually look after the staff, make sure they're fit, healthy, and injury-free. And that is something we can help with.
And I have to say, with Kailash's trial, I was looking at some of the results, and one of the solutions is a sort of desk-based solution. And it turns out, I think at the beginning of the trial, there's everyone slump in their seats from home working before lunchtime. So that's the time when you all need to be careful about all your back injuries, pre-lunch, and then sit up properly. I've got a good question, actually, on the Slido, which is probably relevant to bring in now. So bearing in mind we're talking about risk and health, reducing risk and health and safety. So what are your views on the use of autonomous technology in improving efficiency, but also reducing risk? I'm going to go straight to you, Mike, because that's exactly what you're there to do.
It's a fantastic one. So we talk about autonomy replacing the dull, dangerous and dirty jobs of the past, and distant as well, because people don't want to spend as much time out at sea. So we're in this really interesting opportunity of autonomy, sort of moving high-tech jobs onshore, where people can have a life where they can, they can have all of these exciting new types of roles. But we are sort of seeing this sort of generational sort of change, where we're also facing the challenge around crewing crises, and recruitment into the sector as well. So we're talking about a challenge now about, do you train mariners to be computer gamers or computer gamers to be mariners? So we've sort of this very interesting sort of point of flux, but we absolutely see autonomy being able to do those jobs that otherwise you just can't, in weather conditions, in locations, and tasks, UXO and the likes, where you just don't want people in the mix.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on the autonomy?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So I think maybe the future is automation and mechanization, but I do believe that there are certain tasks, as we currently speak, it will be hard to mechanize. So I think there will be human involved, and we still have to make sure that the tasks are safe for them and make sure they are ergonomically safe so that it doesn't lead to long-term conditions.
Yeah, and I think there's an additional piece around, in the same vein of that sort of semi-autonomy, when we have lots of data streams pulling from these new assets going in the field. It's one of the really interesting things of working with Serco is, you look at the workboats and some of these have been out in the field for like 40-something years, maybe 50 years. There's literally not a single electronic component on these, and all the fuel use is done in pen and paper, and then it's converted into digital, right? So where the new assets that are coming in have a really different kind of productivity matrix that's around them, where you can actually draw all of this rich data around the performance, around the duty cycle, and you can start to optimize. And so you don't need full autonomy to actually do that autonomy. Just having those data streams is going to allow us to sort of take a much more command economy approach to looking at, in our specific use case, energy usage and energy optimization. You might be able to save 20 or 30% of the energy use just by optimizing, just by looking at the duty cycle and saying, maybe we can refuel at this particular time of day because that's when the cost of the fuel is the lowest cost. Or maybe we can actually optimize, we can put a battery and have a battery hybrid system, with the hydrogen in place, or maybe a diesel hydrogen hybrid system, which is what CMB.tech and Rise and Hydrogen are sort of looking at with some of their workboats, and sort of implementing these systems that are humans can't actually make the decisions just by looking at it on face. You need that rich data source.
Yeah. Moving on to data then, I'm going to broaden it out now, so not necessarily talking specifically about maritime, but we'll broaden it out. I'm going to come to you, Richard, because I think that you've helped me there nicely, Jehan, thank you. We've talked about innovation in the past, I had conversations about innovation really relying on individuals and organisations who are willing and open to those kind of changes. So broadly speaking, what do you think might need to change for you to be able to achieve what you want to achieve across different sectors in the world of CCT analytics and data?
Yeah, so it's two things really, and you're quite right. I've always found through my whole career, it's better to follow people, if you like, really, rather than opportunities, because where you have someone who's willing to embrace change, that's when things happen. If you have an organisation where you think there's change is needed and there's no one willing to embrace it, things don't happen. So the two key things really that I see worth calling out is one, thinking a bit more whole systems and starting to bring data together from multiple different sources. Most, particularly heavy industrial environments like ports, they're very siloed in their systems thinking very often. And so having more of an overview of having someone who looks across the operational risk across a whole port, for instance, and how we bring that data together is one key thing. And the second key thing is removing the fear and paranoia of AI in particular. So we do a lot around machine vision. And for instance, we work on the railway around machine vision about detecting trespassers on the railway. And it seems incredible then you'd come across so much resistance around using cameras to spot someone standing on the railway tracks because you're infringing their privacy by spotting them on the railway track. And it's the same we see in port environments. Getting through the data privacy hurdles, as we're finding in our maritime accelerator right at the moment, takes an extraordinarily long time, even though we're purely talking about safety and security. And so I think the government's got some responsibility as well to actually bring some sense around data privacy and around AI and look at where the problems are and address those, excuse me, but then enable things to happen in a bit more of an agile fashion.
Yeah.
Our colleagues in America don't have these same challenges, and that's one reason they're so much more innovative than we are.
Right. I'm going to sort of bring that around to you, Kailash, because we're talking about monitoring in a slightly different way, probably a bit more continuous monitoring with Purple Transform. But how did you find the staff at Port of Tyne and at Serco in accepting having the sensors on?
Yeah, I think, yeah, sure. So yeah, putting sensors on the workwear or something that the participants wear, it's a bit of a challenge. And one of the concerns that we have always reflected on is the concern of people, would staff think as if it's intrusive monitoring? And with the trials that we had done with Serco and with Port of Tyne, what we found was there is that element of how the proposition is actually presented to participants. If it is presented in the best light possible, what is the objective and what is the benefit that participants can get out of it, and what is it leading to, what can the potential outcomes be, then staff can be a lot more, open to taking part in some of those. With Serco, we have had 15 participants who have used our sensors, that they were wearing it a few days a week for about 4 to 6 weeks. And with the Port of Tyne, we have had 8 colleagues who have used our sensors several hours into their work shifts. So I do understand the challenges with continuous monitoring, but there are and there is also, as Richard rightly said, there is a role for the government to play. But I think there is a need for how things are communicated to be addressed as well, and that can address some of the initial challenges.
I think what we were saying, Richard, about individuals and organisations who are open to change, I think we're really lucky on this particular programme with Serco and Port of Tyne and the 2 individuals involved. I won't call them out and embarrass them, Jack, because they have really helped, I think, particularly with you, Kailash, haven't they, in terms of bringing staff on board and being well up for trying these things and trying solutions. It's been a really positive experience for them, which is fantastic. Just to continue with you, Kailash, so how do you feel about the maritime sector, to bring it back to that, is whether we've got sufficient avenues for a new entrant? Is this Accelerator programme enough? What more could be done?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So for any sector to accept or to kind of adapt new innovations that is coming in, I think this sector expects validations, use cases, and evidence base so that it can embrace it. I think the initiatives like the Maritime Accelerator has given us a very valuable opportunity in which we were very quickly able to, put our solutions into test beds, sandbox some of the solutions, and develop those early use cases. Hopefully, we'll continue working with our early adapters in these sectors and build on the evidence basis for the wider sector to adapt. I have also seen similar programs in other sectors, in rail sectors, for example, where the rail operating companies have their own innovation programs, which has led on to successful innovations being adapted. Is that enough? That is a very interesting question. It's time to think about, can the sector do more? Can the sector have an equivalent to the ATI from the aerospace sector? Or can the sector have competitions like the first of the kind innovation competitions that the rail sector used to have? What thinking about? And there is certainly a scope for larger programs with larger time frames and larger funding, which can lead on to higher TRL levels, leading on to wider deployment as well, I think.
Brilliant, thank you. Mike, I'm going to come on to you and Stella, because you stand out slightly differently from the other four, because you work really collaboratively with academics who are trying to make scientific breakthroughs, and so that's quite a different aspect. And then I'll come on to you, Jehan. What's your experience been then when trying to translate those academic breakthroughs into business development?
So I guess one of the key differences from a commercial and industrial point of view is we're very comfortable with multidisciplinary thinking. So our main collaborator at the moment is a professor of fluid dynamics, and we look at developing the structures and mechanisms that can be the enabling physicality, the embodiment to enable these novel breakthroughs in the field of fluid dynamics. One thing in particular that's very important that we bring from a commercial partner with an academic is the idea of product market fit. And really very early on, although we're looking for potential high impact products at the end of the day, it's important we don't get drawn into working on scientific breakthroughs where there's no freedom to operate at the end of that technology pathway, which could easily be 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So what we always do when we're looking at a new technology that's compatible with the suite of technologies we're developing is whether there is freedom to operate. We do in-depth study of the state of the art globally at other leading academic labs, and then also a deep patent search. And so we can ensure that our roadmap, which is typically get something out of the lab, fail fast approach, get to a functional demonstrator, prove internally that the technology will work, and then go for a patent. So we really look at that in detail and in great depth before we start. So, and then the academic benefits as well, because as a collaboration, we now move forwards with protection and a clear roadmap.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask Jehan to comment a bit on that as well, because you kind of come from a similar place. And then also I'm interested in how the UK compares to elsewhere, Australia, for example.
So I think that freedom to operate position is quite an interesting one. It's just something that I don't actually hear very often, but it's quite important. And certainly it's something that I think a lot of universities, when we have collaborations with, I think, now 12 public research institutions around the world. It's a massive rod for my back, and don't recommend it. But it's also, we do it because there's, there is a lot of breakthrough research, but there are a lot of patents that already exist. And so the role of startups is to actually find that narrow path through to the right kind of product that has the right productivity impact, but also, be able to protect that ability to operate. So I think it is really challenging, and I think that the rules around patenting have significantly changed in Europe and Japan in particular, where they require a lot more data upfront. So I think it's really important, I think, for funders to take this into account when they're supporting new innovations that the companies themselves have actually considered, how far they through. Do they have a clear PCT report? Do they have some national phase patents already in place? Those are big green flags to enable the ecosystem. I think the UK is actually doing a really good job from an innovation and funding and support front, and I think it's worth really. I know that there's a lot of conversation around scale, where that's definitely where there needs to be focus around supporting companies to actually go from angel and seed and Series A through to Series B. That requires a lot of funding, and Series C. We're talking sort of Joe Biden, Bidenomics, $100 million US, $300 million US, 700. So just give you an Form Energy got $750 million US for their demonstrator factory, right? See these enormous gigascale factories that are not even yet considered fully commercial, $750 million US for one company, for one factory, right? So this is the scale that smaller countries like Australia and the UK and Singapore need to sort of think about this. Singapore's actually, it's not yet been announced, but they are putting together a major new package. It'll be released later this year or early next year around scale manufacturing for clean tech. They are looking at sort of low carbon emission manufacturing, or sort of, they call them sort of LCPM, so low carbon product manufacturing. So these kinds of organizations they're focused on, and it's an uncapped fund, right? So that you could potentially go for $1 billion or some silly amount of money, and they would provide 50% of the sort of grant leverage. And this is really important for companies because right now there's so much uncertainty in hardware tech. But even in the software game, it's a very, very challenging capital market. And what we don't want is for the companies to leave. And where we are seeing companies go offshore, it's the same in Australia. We're seeing them leave Australia. We're seeing them leave the UK. We need to keep them here. This is sovereign IP. The IP is here to transform this sector. We need transport to sort of move, and so we need to find the resources to make sure that the companies can basically survive. They don't even need to thrive. They just need to sort of get through sort of 3-4 years of great uncertainty, and then at the other end, you'll see a whole lot of start appearing.
Thank you. After your comment about the money for that American company, I was going to ask each of you what you do with $750 million. But yeah, probably less realistic. Okay, then finally you, Mike, on this one. So you're on the other side of the coin. How can the demand side help create opportunities to innovate?
So lots of exciting, we're seeing use cases across port environments as being real hubs. So the ability to bring innovation in both on the shore side and actually on the water. We're seeing a real sort of drive as well. There is a lot of technology. Maritime is a very traditional, very slow-moving sector. So what we've seen a lot of is the marinization of technologies from elsewhere. And actually it's proved a little bit sort of from the ACUA Ocean side that we've brought a lot of technology and people in from Formula One racing. So our senior robotics engineer used to work for the Mercedes F1 team doing sort of powertrain systems. And we've actually taken kit that they've used into the marine sector. So I think that's a real drive of that sort of cross-pollination of different sectors that are maybe more progressed. There's a lot going on with hydrogen in the aviation sector, taking those learnings and applying them to the marine sector and cutting some of the corners in places of the long, hard learnings, but going, it worked here, how do we make it work in the most extreme of environments, which is the ocean, by and large.
Yeah. Let's finish off then a little bit with talking about, Richard, if I come to you, how much does it help being part of this Accelerator programme and being able to run trials in particular? So both Mike and Richard are still continuing with your trials into April, aren't you? Yeah. The others are complete. And excitingly, what's on the horizon for you as a company?
So one of the main things for us is, as we're all small organisations, we don't have a massive sales force. And so very often it's getting in front of those customers that's really key for us. So we started out in transport. We didn't know anyone in maritime when we started. So having the Maritime Accelerator introduce us into those customers, giving us the opportunity to be open and frank. We haven't done anything in maritime yet, but we've got these use cases. We've got this technology we think applies to your sector. If we were just to do that without the Accelerator, I think we'd be showing the door. But to have the funding behind us, to partner with them, to be innovative on something that might fail, then is really helpful and really encouraging because it changes that conversation. And so in terms of where we're going, we see there's massive opportunity. We see kind of two areas, really. One is broader sectors, obviously, but the second is exactly as I said about that more whole systems thinking. We're starting in the Maritime Accelerator with, a few core use cases, if you like, and capabilities. Where we see is using the data that's out there from the situational environment, if you like, to build a much bigger picture of what is my operational risk from that physical environment for the board as a whole, and starting looking at bringing in different systems data, some of the people here, and bringing this into a single platform.
It's exciting. Mike, you've recently, I was going to call it HMS pioneer, but that's my military background coming through again. USB pioneer.
Possibly getting ahead of myself. Yeah. I'd love a contract. There is one coming up.
In the room as well. You've had your big naming ceremony the other day. Really exciting times for your business after some really tough times earlier in the year. So what's next for you?
So Pioneer is in the water and doing sea trials in Plymouth Sound at the moment in the autonomous test bed, and we're taking a crawl, walk, run approach. So over the course of the next 2 months, she's going to go out beyond the breakwater into more sort of extreme sort of conditions. We have had gloriously beautiful weather down in Plymouth, and it's been dead flat, and everyone thinks it's renders and photos, but she is out there. She is turning heads. From our side, we're delivering a Department for Transport demonstration over the course of the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks. And in fact, just today, we are firing up the hydrogen systems for a whole load of accreditation and approvals processes with the regulators, which is very exciting. Beyond that, our real focus is on commercialization. I think that's been a bit of a theme from the panel is, all of the early stage stuff has to lead towards a commercial output. So we're already looking at both some very exciting offshore opportunities with the big ONGs, and accelerators like these actually enable introductions not just to the amazing sort of companies that are sort of partnering with it, but actually to other opportunities that come off the back. We're also just seeing as we come to the end of the spending reviews in government, this has been a particularly tough time because government sort of purse strings have been very, very tight for about the last year or two. So actually we're now seeing a couple of programs of record coming out and actually working with potentially some of the partners on here, and I was having some great conversations over lunch about actually pulling together consortiums to bid into large programs of record with defence coming up quite soon. So that's exciting rest of the year.
Brilliant, thank you. Mike, how about you? You've got other exciting projects I know of, but what's in the plans for the future for you?
Well, As of a few months ago, we've been successful under the ARIA funding agency. So they have a program for the thesis of Professor Jenny Reed, which is called Smarter Robot Bodies. So under that, we have a 2-year program funded slightly over $1 million to look at next generation actuators. So they're a product in themselves for various sectors. So this is more of a soft robotic muscle type actuator, but it also directly applies to our own internal technology lines. So allowing for more robust and rugged technology. One area where we were specifically looking around with the participants and the visitors here today is all of our technology, because it's nature inspired, it tends to be quite mechanically complex, yet robust, but then it needs machine learning to operate. So one thing we need is collaboration, or to start developing in-house high fidelity digital twins of the simulation category. So we need digital twins with fluid dynamics simulation as part of the digital twin, which is slightly different from some of the exhibitors here, where they're more doing an operational side digital twin. So that's something we're looking forward to. And ARIA is a really a great program, because it is deliberately designed to encourage the cohort to be highly collaborative, which is some of what's happened here in the Accelerator as well.
And congratulations for being successful. It was a really good result. Kailash, you've got a stand here, so if people want to try your products, they're there to try, aren't they? And are you hoping to continue with the trials and moving forward with the partners?
That is true. So, I think, as mentioned, we have 2 trials that we are currently in the process of concluding with 2 proactive, forward-leaning organizations, Selvan and Port of Tyne. And the results are quite favorable, which means that we'll continue the engagements with them. And hopefully, in the near future, with some of the evidences that we build, we'll be able to share best practices, possibly influencing some standards that the wider sector can follow and adapt and run with it. And we are also working with other key sectors like rail, and starting some engagements with construction as well. So, so technology has the potential to reduce injuries by 77%. So, we want to see that impact delivered in the next few years.
Absolutely. Jehan, I'm going to finish with you. How was the program for you? And RUCs are everywhere at the minute. Every time I look at LinkedIn, I see your face.
Yeah.
So what's on the cards short term for you?
Yeah, very lucky to have an awesome team in Singapore and Australia as well that are just kicking goals everywhere. So for us, this program's been really instrumental, because it's brought the right kind of specific expertise. A big shout out to Gemma and Arnold in particular, but also the CBC team with their incredibly insightful, like it's sort of like precision engineering, but feels like business, business creation. We had an operating business that was very successful, and they've turned us into like superstars for the big game. And so, just in the last couple of months, we've now been sort of crystallizing some of those sort of like mega deals that really actually allow us to sort of start doing the planning for the sort of big factories, both here in Harwich in Essex, but also in Australia and Sydney, and closing up a number of the major supply chain deals that we've got with Westington Cryogenics in Newcastle upon Tyne, and Element Engineering in Bristol, and National Composite Centre, and Maritime Port Authority in Bureau Veritas in Singapore. So it's a lot going on, and you'll see in another LinkedIn post tomorrow morning we'll launch the preview of Serco MOU to look at sort of energy security for the UK, because there is a future where we will think that buying diesel overseas to supply our defence capability is silly. We will look at this era as being just ridiculous, because we will be able to provide all of our fuels ourselves here at home, and we will never think about importing those kinds of fuels again. And that's the future that we're working on with Serco at the moment. Right now, it's the other way around, where it's kind of crazy. It seems crazy when we do all these fuels, but it's a very near future. It's within the next 5-6 years. So it's very exciting to be able to sort of start that process with Serco. So look out for it tomorrow morning.
Perfect. Been a superb cohort this year, fantastic. Everyone's been super busy doing other things as well as this programme and still been able to really commit to it, so it's been great working with you all. I'm going to plug the programme for next year. If you're an SME and you're watching this or listening to this, we'll be running a similar programme next year, so watch out for that at the back end of April. Thank you to our partners who have been absolutely superb. It's a great programme for that, which is what makes it so successful. Thank you for taking part in the panel as well, and thank you all for listening and being here.